Oh my gosh. It would be something related to love the people that we come in contact with. Be the best part of their day. Act in a way that they go home and talk to the people that they care about what happened in the day. I got to spend time with you.
Hello and welcome to another episode of your Break Free podcast. I am your host, David Mancilla. I'm excited today. We have with us today David Schreiner. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, David. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to spend time with you.
David, for the audience, can you give me your full name? Where do you live and what do you do for a living?
I'm Dr. David Schreiner. I live in Dixon, Illinois, which is about 2 hours west of Chicago, and I'm the President and Chief Executive Officer of Catherine Shaw Bethea Hospital.
So you run a hospital?
I do. We have a rural hospital with 80 beds and about just under 1,000 employees.
That's amazing, David. What is it like to actually be responsible for so many lives? You're probably, for me, one of the most risk-inclined jobs is to actually run a hospital.
Well, David, it's interesting, and it's always something different because it's not only our patients that we're fortunate enough to take care of, but it's also our employees and our team members, because as you can imagine, in a small community, when we employ that many people, you can almost multiply that by 4 because of the households that they represent. So it is a big responsibility. I've been here for a long time. I've been here for 35 years and our Chief Executive Officer since 2011. So a person does grow into the position, but it does come with responsibility.
So David, you've been in that hospital for 35 years?
I have.
That's amazing. And so I know you're at the top. You know how many, I think you are the only one guest that I had in this podcast that had that experience, which is incredible and very, very rare. Because usually what happens, David, is that people don't appreciate your talent in the same job where you didn't have the talent or you didn't have the skills, right?
I've been so fortunate, David, in that I've had a new job every few years. I'm our senior administrative staff. I'm the CEO that I preceded, and he was here for 25 years. He gave me new opportunities every few years. And then a couple of years before I became our CEO, the board of directors decided that they wanted me to succeed him. And so it's a blessing, and it's also comes with some challenges when you're at the same place for that long, as you and many of your listeners can imagine. But I've been blessed, and I'm very grateful for the support of our board of directors.
And being close to 1,000 employees, I mean, it's not an easy task to go all the way to the top, right?
I started as our director of medical imaging, the X-ray department. So I came from the University of Kansas Medical Center with a brief stop in between at a hospital in Missouri. And again, I just kept having other opportunities, David, and I moved through the ranks and became a vice president, became a chief operating officer, and then the president and CEO.
Were you always wanted to be in healthcare?
I didn't have any idea what I wanted to be in. I finished my bachelor's degree and I majored in track and field. So I just didn't know at all what I wanted to do when I finished school. I went out to visit my mother in Kansas, and I was playing in a pickup basketball game on a Saturday at a community college, at a junior college. And the person that was the director of the program was playing in that game, and he had a person from program drop out the week before. So they had one slot open in their X-ray tech program, which is a 2-year series of classes. And I took it, and I loved it from the very first moment. I loved the science behind it. I loved the people that I met that were working in healthcare, as well as the patients that I was fortunate enough to take care of. And I just got very, very lucky.
So all this career came from a game of basketball? Is that what you're telling me?
It came from a game of basketball. I had no idea what I was going to do when I finished my undergrad. And so that led to a lot of wonderful things for me and my family.
I told you before, I'm a man of faith. So, I love Jesus Christ. He rules my life now, and he's guiding my path. And And since I came back to my faith 2 years ago, all I do is read the Bible. And Psalm 139 shows that there is a book written about us that we're supposed to follow if we allow the Lord to guide us. And what you just told me just proved that. Like, how can you become the CEO of a hospital just by started by playing a basketball game?
I think that faith is such a big part of it, and that openness to hearing, and that's not always been easy for me, but listening and understanding that there is a path there, and asking for help in making those decisions, and asking for help in taking care of the people that we're responsible for. That faith is a big part of my belief as well.
After your education, David, did you look for a job? Like, how did you land the first gig at the hospital? Or were you actively looking? Like, how did that connection happen?
It's, again, I consider myself one of the luckiest people in the world, but I came up to be the best man in the wedding of a person that was in my fraternity. And when I was living in Missouri at the time, and at the reception of that wedding, I met a person from the hospital that was hiring for the director of the X-ray department here at KSP. And so 2 weeks later, I interviewed, and a week after that, they made the offer to me. And a couple weeks after that, I was moving from Missouri to Dixon, and my wife and at that time daughter were following me a month or two later when we sold our house. So it all happened very fast, David.
Now, how do you come from like being a college grad to a director of radiology?
Well, there were some things in the middle. So I stayed at this junior college for 2 years. So I got my bachelor's degree first. That was in health education. And then I went back to a junior college. So I did those kind of backwards. And when I finished that, my first job was at the University of Kansas Medical Center as an X-ray tech, and I learned a tremendous amount. It was a large trauma center, and the volume was so high, David, that I got to treat a lot of people in a very short amount of time. And from there, I went to a place in Clinton, Missouri called Golden Valley Memorial Hospital, and over about a 12 to 18 month period, I became the assistant director there. But I thought I needed some more time in that role, so I really wasn't looking for a job. And so when I went up to my friend's wedding and that we began that discussion, I was really surprised that worked out.
Okay, so you did have a few jobs before that.
I did, yes.
That's amazing. How did it go? Like, was the institution about the same size, smaller in size? Like, what was the transition between jobs?
Yeah, so the organization that I was with in Missouri was very much like the hospital that I'm at here today. So it was a similar sized community. The hospital was similar sized. Of course, both of these organizations were much different than University of Kansas, which was very large. And I didn't know very many people there. I was working second shift, and I didn't know the leadership team at all. At Golden Valley, I was introduced to some really wonderful leaders, the person that I reported to at the time in the X-ray department, and also the hospital CEO. And they got me to begin thinking that leadership was something that I wanted to do. And so when that opportunity arose, I took it. And when I came up to Dixon, it really felt a lot like the place that I was before, David. It was very warm. It was welcoming. It was a community of 16,000. And I grew up in a very small community of about 3,500 people. So I grew up in a small town in the Midwest. And that's what we've liked. The thing that has been so wonderful is my wife and I were able to raise our two children here. They didn't have to move every other year. So many of my colleagues in healthcare administration and hospital administration, they move a lot. The average tenure for a hospital CEO is 3.4 years. And I didn't have to do that. Both of my children went from kindergarten through high school at a Catholic school here in our community. So we felt very blessed.
You know, there is a lot of problems when there is not stability for your children. You know, but sometimes your career takes precedence because you need to, you're the breadwinner, right? So you need to move where the job is. When I started my leadership career, when I got my first job as a leader, it was in Toronto, and I live about an hour and a half away from Toronto. Back then, it was a community with 90,000 people, and very beautiful town, close to zero crime rate. And then I got offered this amazing job that I couldn't say no to. Like, we prayed about it. So instead of moving my family to Toronto, I actually drove for 10 years.
Oh, wow.
So I kept my family stable, and I was the one taking the hit on the traffic. That brought a lot of problems later on anyways, but but at least in the childhood of my kids, they had a stable home, right?
So you were driving 3 or more hours every day.
Yeah.
And that was before podcasts were available for you to listen to.
Yeah, I remember, like, I bought a CD player on my car, so I could actually stick CDs and listen to something of value, right?
Right.
Because I was sick and tired of the radio.
That is one of the greatest things. Is I live less than 10 minutes from work, and there's one stoplight between me and my house. From where I am now at work in the hospital, there's one stoplight between me and home, so it's about a 10-minute drive.
You know what though? Like you tend to take for granted all those blessings that the Lord gives you. I was born in Guatemala, so I came from back then the city was 4 million people. I came into a town of 90,000 people, and I felt so weird because I was so used to the city life. Like I was born in Guatemala City, and you know I thought I was coming to live in Toronto, which was about the same size back then, but it wasn't. I ended up because I went to college here, so all the universities and colleges for computer science are here. So I told my wife, this is weird, but in 4 months we got used to it. It was amazing.
And you've never left?
I never left. So I went back to Guatemala this year for 4 months during the winter, into the city, and I'm like, I didn't know how beautiful my life was until I got back to this jungle.
You know, David, I think that's such an important point that do we pause often enough and understand how wonderful things are where we are right now? And my wife and I just got back from vacation, and as we were driving in the last couple of miles of our vacation, we said, you know, the things that we saw and the places we went were incredibly beautiful, but so is this. And we were taking the drive home along the river to our home, and we thought, how fortunate are we to see the river and the crops? And last night we had a deer in our backyard. And, you know, do we take time to see those kinds of things and give thanks for all of those blessings that we're given?
You know, that still happens here, David. Nice that you mentioned that. So in the weather has been kind of crazy in Canada. I don't know how it's within you guys, but it looks like a tropical country now. Like we'll have 2 hours of heavy rain and then sunshine. And it's been like that for like 2 months. So the wildlife is different. I mean, we usually get deer in my property during the winter, but never in the summer. And last week I had 2 deer at 6 p.m. show up, like, you know, broad daylight. The other day we had turkeys flying down into our backyard. So like full of wildlife. We saw a fox like at noon 3 weeks ago.
Amazing. That's just such a wonderful place to live.
You know, and I'm still an hour away from the city, and everything I can wish and want is there, right?
Right.
By the way, where I live now is 300,000 people. It's not a small town anymore, right?
You're a long way from Guatemala. A lot of difference.
Well, now Guatemala is 8 million people.
Yeah, my goodness.
Imagine that. I mean, still a beautiful place, but you know, like, and I went from a beautiful house to a beautiful tiny apartment, like 800 square feet, right? So.
This podcast is brought to you by ISU Corp. Are you having trouble with your software projects? Is there a project that's taking too long or a technology you can't handle? We can help. We are ISU Corp, experts in custom software since 2005. With almost 20 years of experience, we can solve any technical problem from new businesses to satellite software. We've done it all. Let us turn your ideas into reality. Learn more about how we can help by visiting us at www.isucorp.ca. Your solution starts here.
David, when you got that director's role, was it ever in your mind that you wanted to eventually become the top leader at the organization?
It was in my mind, but it wasn't something that was a motivator for me. I always tried to concentrate on the position that I was in, because I had a leader very early in my career, actually here at this hospital, the person that was the CEO before me. And he gave me great advice, David. One of the things that he said is, I've never seen someone promoted or advanced when they didn't excel in the position that they were in. And I see so many times when people are looking at the job 3 or 4 steps on the organizational chart away from them and saying, that's the job that I want. And sometimes it keeps us from excelling in the job that we have. And so it comes back to that gratitude around, I'm in a good spot. I'm in a job that I love doing, and I need to be great at it. And if I'm great at this, that should offer other opportunities, either with this employer or with someone else. And so I really never looked more than 1 or 2 steps ahead to think about, or give myself much time to think, that's the job I want. I just tried to excel at the job that I was in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and you know what? It's so right. Sometimes we get caught off in so much in our career growth that we stop enjoying where we are right at the time. Like you start living so much in the future that you don't enjoy the present.
Right. Yes, and part of it, the decisions that my wife and I had to make is we were at an 80-bed hospital, about roughly 500 million in gross revenue. And the question that we receive quite often is, why don't you want to go to a health system that's twice that size or 10 times that size? And we just made the decision that where we were living and the work that we were doing, my wife is a registered nurse, it was where we wanted to be. And so we didn't pursue those opportunities. And looking back now, I'm glad we didn't.
Yeah. And because you had career advancement anyway, like you were able to go all the way to the top.
Yes, and I realize not everyone has that opportunity, and sometimes we do have to move on in order to get the jobs and the challenges that we want to have in our lives. I was lucky enough to have those challenges at home.
I was one of those guys. I mean, so the first thing that I did is, so my first job was in town here in Volatile region. Then my second job was in Toronto, and 2 years after that, I started jumping. So if you look at my career path when I was in corporate, I had 5 jobs in 10 years.
With different employers?
Yeah. And every time I moved, I went up. So they would headhunt me out to a higher up position. And I also realized that I will get bored. That's when I thought, okay, I'm born to be an entrepreneur, because I will work myself out of the job, and then I will have very little to do, and then I will actually entertain offers. So after that happened 5 times, I'm like, okay, what if I open my own business so that every single client is a different job so I don't get bored?
Right. And David, maybe I'm not smart enough to get bored, but I've been so lucky to be in positions, and maybe it's the hospital industry that does that, but there's so many ways to engage with patients, with family members, with our team members, with community members. I get to work with physicians every day, and it's never been boring to me. So I've been very fortunate that way.
Actually, I wasn't bored because I was smart, David. In fact, because I consider myself the worst in the team, I will always hire people better than me. That's why I didn't have anything to do, because everybody could do it better than me.
That's a great tactic. I've employed that as well.
When was the opportunity to jump to your next level? So you started as a director. How long did it take to become a vice president? Well, that's your next job?
Yeah, there were a couple of things that were in there. No, it was not my next job, David. So as a medical imaging director, I was asked at the time to help lead a couple of other departments, so laboratory, physical therapy, for example. So I stepped outside of X-ray and worked with supervisors in other areas. And then from there, the opportunity that I had was our CEO asked me to open an occupational medicine clinic. So we had 2 physicians that came over from another clinic in our community, and we brought them into the organization. We built an occupational medicine program, and from that was relatively successful. And from that job, I then became a vice president and had the opportunity to work with leaders in many departments with that position. I really learned a lot in areas that I didn't have expertise in. So that whole journey was, I guess the first part was probably a total of 4 or 5 years. I was only about 35 when I became a vice president, so I was relatively young.
So, David, was it hard for you to leave the technical aspects of your job, like when you were actually involved in the technology, and you love that, and then all of a sudden you realize, if I take this position, I'm going to become a real leader, and I know I will be away from what I love the most?
That is such a great question. And the thing that I noticed immediately was that one of the things I love so much about being an X-ray tech is I was able to work with a patient and I got films immediately. And so I knew right away, I did a good job, I did an average job, or I did a poor job. It was instant feedback. And then I got to move on to the next patient. And what I learned very quickly in department leadership is there's very infrequently a goal line. Right? There's so many things, and the more, I think the higher one moves up the organizational chart, the more long-term, the more strategy that a person is working with. And so I don't go home every night knowing if I did a good job or not, because some of the things that ideally that I put into place today may not bear fruit for 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. And that was the hardest part for me, was just not getting that instant feedback.
The thing, not getting that instant feedback must have been terrible, right?
Oh, it's tough. Yeah, it's really tough because it was important to me. It was something that I enjoyed.
And also, you know, another thing that happened to me when I started becoming a leader with more responsibility is that when I used to make a mistake as a technician or as a technical person, I could see the mistake the same day or maybe 2-3 days from the time that I made a mistake. But as a leader, like you said, it might be 6 months, a year, 2-3 years, but the consequences are 100 times worse.
That's exactly right. And that can be overwhelming, can't it, David? I mean, it really can be, it can add a tremendous amount of stress. And that's where I do call upon my faith to say that I'm doing the best job I can and I'm making the best decisions with the information that I have at the time. And we all know that information changes so quickly. And I believe that that's accelerating. I think that feedback is so much faster than it's ever been. And that can be overwhelming and it's very stressful. And it still is for me. But as long as I know that I'm doing the best I can with what I have, then that's something that I can accept.
You know, the one thing that we need to learn in life, not just as leaders, but as human beings, is that there is only so much we control in our life, right? Like, we think we have more control, but if you really come down to it, there is only so much. Everything else is outside of the realm of our control. So if you know that, why don't we just focus on what we control to make it better and leave everything else to the Lord so that He could guide our steps? That's why when I see people like, you know, a lot of people don't have faith or at least their faith is silent. And I'm like, I don't know, how can you be a top leader without a level of faith? Because otherwise my stress will kill me. The anxiety will kill me.
I'll speak about myself, but if I were to look at a soundtrack of what I think about from midnight until midnight the following day, right? So you take a 24-hour period, and what am I focusing on? How much am I truly focusing on the things that I can control, and how much of my anxiety is around things that happened in the past or things that might happen in the future? And I think as we get older, I'm a few weeks away from 62. As we get older, I think we start to realize that the things that happened in the past, I don't have any control over that. And the majority of things I'm worried about happening in the future don't happen. So the more we can be present, and that's something that I fight every hour of every day, I think it leads to many gifts.
What is that, the statistics? Don't they say that 95% of what we worry about will never happen?
Exactly. And I think it's true. It might even be low. Or we think about all the things that we're going to say or that we should have said, and we're never going to say them.
You know, I read an article like about 5 years ago that says humans are nothing but cucumbers with emotions, right? Well, 70% water with emotions. But it's so true. Sometimes I see my life, and if you look back and you see the worst problems that I went through, I made them myself, and they didn't need to happen. And it was mostly because of preoccupation of stuff that wasn't going to happen anyway, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I agree with those. And the things that I would add is that when I have treated people in the way that I aspirationally want to treat them, things always work out. I've been times when I've not acted in the best interest of other people that matter to me, and I can do better. And I think those are those learning opportunities that we have to absorb.
And you know what? That's called servant leadership. And it's so true. I had to learn that lesson the hard way. At the beginning of my career as a leader, I thought I was the boss and I could just dictate to people to do whatever I wanted them to do because I was the boss and I was the smartest person in the room. Once I quickly realized that wasn't the case and I was just shooting myself in the foot. And then I allowed to have decisions made by the group to their best interest, not mine. Everything changed.
I completely agree with you that that's servant leadership. And the other thing that I learned through my doctoral studies and that I wrote about in my book was the idea of values-driven leadership. And am I leading in a way that is consistent with my own values?
Tell me, what's your book about? What's the name of the book and what is the book about?
Sure, yeah, I can show you one of them. Hopefully you can get a chance to see that.
Yeah.
So it's called Be the Best Part of Their Day, Supercharging Communication with Values-Driven Leadership. And what that's about is connecting in a more meaningful way with the people that matter to us the most. So whether that is on a professional basis or on a personal basis, are we connecting in ways that are the most effective? And this is based on the doctoral research that I did with 5 healthcare systems from around the country. I had the opportunity to interview people in 5 different hospitals, 5 of the best performing hospitals in the United States. And I learned from those people that there are traits that are consistent that all 5 of these people were doing that were a contributor to that success. So in my book, I take all the things that I couldn't put into my dissertation because my dissertation chair kept telling me, you can't put that into a doctoral dissertation. Those are your experiences or those are your opinions. And so I kept those and it became a book that became a #1 bestseller on Amazon.
Congratulations for that, David. Writing a book is one of the hardest things any professional could ever do. But I shouldn't say that to you because you made a PhD, like you went through a PhD while being the boss. How do you manage that?
Yeah, well, the first piece of advice that I would give is if you work in healthcare, do not start a doctorate degree and then have an international pandemic hit a year later. So the time it could not have been any worse. So it was a 3-year program and I was about 1.5 years into it when COVID-19 hit, and it certainly changed things. Thankfully, I had finished the majority of my coursework, so the in-class portion was almost finished. And then I was able to do my doctoral research online, virtually, just like you and I are doing right now, David. So I did 26 interviews virtually with people around the country, and it worked out okay.
I understand. Well, talking about how much you can control, right? Imagine that. You will never expect that curveball thrown at you.
No control over that period. That's absolutely right.
Talking about your doctoral dissertation, I understand it's a scientific research, so opinions don't matter. But honestly, when you are in real life, it's the experiences of yourself and the people around you that really teaches you how to live your life better. The book of Proverbs says, in the counsel of many, you find wisdom, right?
Oh, I absolutely agree. And I believe that we learn from people that we respect, and we also learn from people that we might not respect as much. And we make the decision that I don't want to do that. That's a behavior that I don't want to have, or that's not consistent with my values. And I think, again, if we pause and we take moments to reflect and say, should I change my values? Am I seeing this properly? Is that consistent with my faith? Or is it something that I want to be aware of and notice that I don't want to do that? That's not consistent with my faith. It's not consistent with my values. And we learn from both of those things. And I think it goes a tremendous amount down the path of who we are and how we act, how we show up every day.
David, if you had a way to go into a time machine and go back 25 years, what would you tell your younger self?
Oh, that's such a great question. Worry less. Understand that God does take care of us. He has a path, even if we can't see it.
Amen to that. I think you and I are old enough to finally understand that. But I would have done the same thing. I'm 52, and by the way, you look like you're 48. So I need to move to a smaller town for sure.
You're very kind. I feel like I'm 75 sometimes, so you're very kind.
But it's right. We need to take a chill pill, don't we?
We do.
And just enjoy every day and have goals and aspirations and let the Lord direct our path. I mean, we make it so much complicated. And if I look back, I'm like, I could have such much more fun. I mean, I did have fun, but all the problems and struggles in life, like I almost destroyed my marriage, for example, for being just taking stupid decisions.
We've all been there, right, David? I mean, life is hard, and when I present in front of in front of conferences or seminars, I always talk about the idea of when they go home at night, you want them to talk about you being the best part of their day. That's where the title of the book came from. Be nice, treat people with love, treat them the way that you would want to be treated or better. And life is so much more fun. Be curious, learn about other people. The reason that I started my doctoral dissertation was that I felt that I was living in a world where we didn't listen to each other. You would speak, and while you were speaking, I was developing my answer to your question. And I wasn't learning from you. I wasn't understanding why you saw something from a certain way. And I wanted to learn more about that communication. And I think I have learned just a little bit. But people are so fascinating, and each of us have a story, just like you began this interview with, David. And it's so much fun to hear those stories. And everybody has their own path.
And there is always a lesson in each story, right? And you're completely right. Learning how to communicate is as simple, I think, as listen more and speak less, isn't it?
It is. And I had 3 major categories that I talk about in my book, and each of those 3 categories have 5 components. Some of those are around listening. They're around gratitude. They're around asking great questions. And then I give examples of how that can be done. So I think every once in a while we have to do that inventory of how we're doing and how are we showing up and how are we being perceived by others.
Have you ever read the book, The 5 Love Languages?
I have.
I learned a great deal of communication through that book.
Great. That might be one of those books that should be reread every couple of years.
Right? It's incredible. So highly for the audience, highly suggest go read that book. By the way, David, I want to learn more about your book so we can get it on Amazon. Can you please put it again on the screen so people see it?
Sure, I would love to. Thank you.
Be the best part of the day. Yeah, for sure. Like, and this is not like, I understand now, like this is not in the narcissistic way. This is actually being in a servant leadership way, where actually you want to be so you want to add so much value to everybody else's life and forget about yourself that they will be talking about you. It's beautiful.
The book really is a compilation of stories. So if you're scared of statistics, I promise there are very few, and you can get through them very quickly. They're really more examples of way that, as I mentioned earlier, the ways that people are engaging in meaningful ways with others, and people can do that. And so what I talk about is do an inventory of these 15 things that I describe in the book and see how many you're already doing great. I would suggest you're probably doing 12 or 10 or 8 of those things really great right now. And then pick one other thing that interests you and focus on that for 2 or 3 weeks and just keep moving that needle forward.
That's beautiful. David, what's in the future for you?
One of the things that is active for us right now is our organization is going through an affiliation with a larger health system. So we're an independent private hospital right now, and by the end of the calendar year, we'll be part of a Catholic health system. So I'm very excited about that for our community, for our employees. I think it's going to improve the quality of care and the offerings that are in our community. So that's my focus right now, David, is finishing that deal and getting that done.
You know, I just did a screening interview for another podcast guest, and he worked for I don't remember the name, but it was the Catholic healthcare system, and he told me it was the second largest in the United States. Like, I don't remember how many billions and billions of dollars they have under management.
It'll be quite a different situation for our organization and for me. As I mentioned, we're a small hospital, a small health system, and this hospital, it's OSF Healthcare is the name of it, and they're based in Peoria, Illinois, and they're the 23rd largest health system in the United States. So that will create some tremendous opportunities and advantages.
That is beautiful. David, almost 40 minutes went by already, and I do want to respect your time. I know you're a busy executive. I'll ask you one last question before we finish the podcast. If you had access to a billboard in front of the busiest highway on earth, what would you write on it?
Oh my gosh. It would be something related to love the people that we come in contact with.
Love the people that we become in contact with.
Be the best part of their day. Act in a way that they go home and talk to the people that they care about what happened in the day. I got to spend time with you.
It's beautiful. You know, I was reading Matthew 5 for the last 2 days with my wife, and it's when Jesus talks about love your enemies. And you're talking about love the people you're becoming in contact with. And to me, that also includes the people that are rude to you. That also includes probably the police officer that stopped you because you went 5 miles faster than you should be and give you a horrible fine, right?
That's correct. I didn't say it was easy.
Right. David, thank you so much for your time, for the beauty of your wisdom. Thank you for being open-minded. If people like to go buy your book or learn more about you, where can they find you?
Sure. The book is available on Amazon. My website is drdavidschreiner.com. So you're welcome to visit that as well. I've had the opportunity to travel around the country and even a little bit internationally to talk about the research and the book. And I'd love to get a chance to work with people in their teams.
Fantastic. David, thank you so much for your time. God bless you and have a beautiful rest of the week.
Thank you for the work that you're doing, and thank you for having me as a guest.
Cheers. Bye.
That's all for today's episode of the Break Free Podcast. Head on over to iTunes and subscribe to the show. Starting your own business can be tough, but it doesn't have to be. Visit davidmansilla.com to pick up a copy of the #1 international best-selling book, Breaking Out of Corporate Jail. Expand what you consider to be possible and reach your full potential. And join us on the next episode.